And Jameel Ahmad, Chief Analyst at GTC in Dubai. Very good to have you on the program. So how much is this Asia really tied to that tariff truce earlier this week and the hope of a possible Fed rate cut?
It's a mixture of both. I think that the timing looks quite positive because when you consider that, I think the market's been waiting for a positive signal to, let's say, resume a rally because we've had stagnant financial markets in terms of the range for a number of months. But the signal that the US Central Bank are getting closer and closer to resuming cutting interest rates, that certainly helps provide some positive sentiment. And of course, now I wouldn't say it's just the trade truce, but at least we have some guidance on where tariffs are standing when it comes to the tariff rates worldwide, because we've spoken so many times now about the multiple deadlines. Will there not be tariffs? It basically hasn't been any kind of clarity or certainty for guidance. So that's also providing somewhat of a hope for sentiment, but mainly it's the US Central Bank expectations that I think are fueling the fire to this rally.
I'm wondering about the risk, though, to the market. You know, President Trump, he's been calling on the the central bank to sort of lower rates. But the Fed chief, he's been resisting, saying, no, we're not going to lower rates just because you, the president, says so. What if the Fed doesn't actually follow suit and, lowers rates? What's the risk to the markets?
Well, if you look at the softening economic data now that's coming in from the US, and that's based on all of the uncertainty, because that's the thing. Everybody's looking for the impact of the tariffs. But in reality, we haven't had an impact really because these tariffs have never been imposed for a consistent period. But we've had uncertainty, and that uncertainty is starting to weigh into the economic data. For example, you had a downward revision of nearly 200,000 jobs over the past couple of months. You also had a very weak employment report for July, and that suggests that we're seeing weakness in the US economy. And that's why the Fed will start to get closer to cutting interest rates. And now they at least know where the tariffs stand. It hasn't helped that because you've had the goalposts being changed so many times from the Trump administration, like any business and industry, the central bank of the US also hasn't been able to plan for tomorrow. But I think they're starting to plan now, and the timing's there for 1 or 2 interest rate cuts between now and the end of the year. And unless we see a real sharp move in inflation, which I don't think is going to happen because the tariffs are not that aggressive, then there's no reason to doubt that actually the Fed are gearing up for an interest rate cut, whether the president's putting pressure on them or not.
Now, regarding oil, investors are closely watching this upcoming Trump-Putin meeting. Beyond just the headlines, what's a realistic, tangible outcome that could actually move prices?
We have a truce or some light at the end of the tunnel towards ending this conflict that's been going on now for nearly 3 years. We have to remember the reason why interest rates are the highest levels that we've seen in decades and why we had inflation levels that some of us hadn't seen in decades. Actually, the catalyst was the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So if we can hopefully remove those risks from financial markets, then we're going to have a much more positive sentiment because we're not going to be so much concerned about inflation. Central banks are going to be more open towards cutting interest rates back towards where they were a couple of years ago. And then you have an overall positive market sentiment because of less geopolitical risk premium. Maybe we're getting too optimistic about these talks, but let's hope that, yes, we can end what has been a very unfortunate and prolonged conflict that's caused not only economic instability and financial market volatility, but unfortunately it's causing loss of lives as well.
Jameel Ahmad, thank you so much for your time and your analysis.